Welcome to the program. My name is Mike Saunders, and it is again my pleasure to be host and moderator for today's discussion on bullying. We all know the story of Amanda Todd, the teenager who killed herself in 2012 following years of relentless bullying. It's a story that continues to haunt us. Because of situations like this, we're getting more aware of what bullying is and are becoming less tolerant of behaviors that constitute bullying. But we do have a long way to go still. Most of us grew up in an era where children beating each other up in the schoolyard or calling each other names was chalked up to, well, just being a kid. Likewise, water cooler gossip by colleagues or disparaging words from a volatile boss were put up with because, well, it's a job, he's the boss, or I need the money. In most cases, people were advised to simply suck it up, buttercup, or learn how to fight back when finding oneself in one of these stressful situations. Joining us to help with our understanding of bullying, we have two experts on the subject from Brock University. We have Zopito Marini, a professor in child and youth studies, and Lisa Barrow is an assistant professor in the Goodman School of Business at Brock, who specializes in workplace bullying. And hello to you both.
Hello to you.
To begin our discussion, let's quickly go around the table with your brief top 5 characteristics of bullying. So let's start with you, Zopito.
Well, bullying would say is a behavior that is proactive. People are trying to get something out of the act. It's targeted people that are weaker than themselves, so there's a power imbalance, and it's fairly intentional. It's an intentional act of injuring somebody. Now there's the other side, that bullying could also be a reactive behavior where people perceive a slight has been done to them and they feel that they have to react. Usually in fact, we've just done a paper on that, and one of the things that we're trying to get across is that for something to be bullying, it has to be a little more proactive. It has to be you're trying to get something out of the act, of the behavior.
Okay, and Dr. Lisa, for you?
Yes, when we look at workplace bullying, it's repetitive behavior that devalues and harms others. And so when we look at workplace bullying, it's intentional. And it could be also teasing individuals, it could be demoting individuals if you're the boss and you don't like that person. It could be destabilization, which is giving that individual jobs that are not considered to be valuable jobs in the workplace. So there are several characteristics when we look at the topic of workplace bullying.
Okay, now on to the discussion. Now, what strikes me as being one of the big challenges in tackling bullying is the fact bullying appears to reap definite, identifiable rewards. Bullies get attention, they get respect, fear, pride, resources, dates, even promotions, business deals, and so on. Is our society hardwired to reward the so-called survival of the fittest, and in fact, bullying may even be part of our evolution?
Well, I would say that some parts of our human nature is definitely hardwired to stress the competitive aspect of human interaction. So one of the things that this is quite recent. For the longest time, we thought bullying was more of a maladaptive behavior. Bullying happened because people did not have the skills to do better. More recently, people have trying to get that idea on its head and say, maybe people bully because it's an adaptive behavior. Like you said, they get something out of it. And so there's a fair amount of benefits for being a bully. One of the things that we notice that the benefits tend to be short-term. The long-term strategy for being a bully is not a good one because the consequences of it is quite serious.
I'd like to interject and say that I'm in agreement with you, Zopito, and I look at it from the workplace, and the individuals who are typically promoted, when they get the raises or whatever, typically are individuals who embrace bullying behaviors. And I'd say it was probably 2 years ago I was at a conference and I had presented on workplace bullying, and one of the audience members asked me if I had done research regarding the benefits of bullying. And I thought that was very interesting, and he followed up his question with a statement that the reason why he was asking is because he bullies others, and he said that in his particular industry it's common practice because he needs to motivate employees to work harder, to focus on the customers more, to not make mistakes. And he said, so based on what you've described, I'm a bully. And he says, but I benefit from the bullying.
Right. I would say that that's a very typical scenario, particularly in the world of adults, but it also works in the world of children. But I would say that, for example, that kind of strategy will have short-term benefits. So someone do gain promotion and moves on to the next job. However, the place that he left is probably left in a shamble. The morale is low. People are probably are leaving the place and so on. So that is the trade-off of bullying. There's no doubt that both children and adults that are bullies do gain something out of it. But what we don't see, and perhaps this is one of the things that we should do a little more, is to be conscious of the fact that what's it left in its wake.
Exactly. And it's interesting because as I look at the workplace and I see individuals who are bullied, and they're very fearful of the bullies because typically the bullies are in a position of authority, not all of the time.
No.
But I think it's the same as if on the playground where a child is a bully, everyone is afraid of that individual, and so they kind of back down and they won't say anything to him or her, and therefore they gain more power in the playground.
Right.
They also gain more power in the workplace because they are able to influence others to change their attitudes or behaviors towards another person, especially if the person is targeted.
Exactly. I mean, I would say the major aim is to get resources. However, those resources you define. I mean, resources could be even reputation. In terms of young children, for example, the resources, it could be beating people up so you can get some money and go and buy smokes. And so one of the things that we do find, for example, that bullies, indeed, they do have more people around them. Okay, they're not necessarily well liked, but they have a fair amount of almost they have a following, as it were. And I suspect the same is in the world of work, where you have bosses that have a fair amount of cadre, as they say.
Yes, and it's so true because those bosses, especially who bully, a lot of times they think that they are being very productive and being very efficient and effective. And the employees who report to them can't stand them.
Yeah.
And so, but yet when the boss is in the room, the boss who is the bully is in the room, the employees are so fearful of this individual that they pretend to like this individual, pretend to go along with the individual so that they are not the targets of bullying in the future. And I think the same thing happens on the playground.
Exactly. I mean, I think you're right on that, Lisa, because what we find in a bullying situation where you have about 85% of the incident of bullying, there's somebody watching.
Yes.
And usually the way it works, there's very few instances where people have the courage to step in. And so from an intervention point of view, one of the things that we're trying to do is empower the onlookers to do something. Even walking away is doing something. And so a lot of times people do not intervene, children do not intervene, because, as you said, there's fear that they might be next. And they don't want to be ostracized, they don't want to be isolated. So that's a real issue.
Right, and it's a common issue with adults too, because adults are afraid of losing their jobs. They're afraid of being demoted, they're afraid of being bullied. And so instead of helping the targeted person, now I must say though, a lot of targeted individuals that I have spoken to have said that their colleagues have said to them in private that they support them, and gee, I know what you're going through, I see what the boss is doing to you. However, whenever that targeted person says, will you come with me to HR, or will you talk to the union, or if the targeted person decides to file a lawsuit,
Right.
all of a sudden, those employees who were supporting that individual,
Yeah.
they don't want to have anything to do with it because they are afraid of losing their jobs.
Exactly.
And, you know, it's a realistic concern.
Concern, and this is where the cost-benefit
Yes.
ratio comes in and balance. Maybe we could just talk a little bit about the incivility, which is what we consider a precursor to to bullying. And incivility can best be defined as a kind of low-level antisocial behavior. I mean, fairly ambiguous. One of the things that I like to think about when I think of incivility is jello substance. It's hard to get your hands on, mainly because when people behave in an uncivil manner, you just don't know exactly what they're doing. With bullying, usually the behavior is serious enough that you can recognize it. With uncivil behavior, it's difficult. And part of the problem is that if you have an uncivil atmosphere in a school or a workplace, is that it becomes a contagious effect. It spreads to people. And so, and the main problem is that if we don't intervene, if we don't stop, it tends to escalate like any other antisocial behavior.
And that's true. I think a lot of incivility occurs in the workplace as well. And sometimes it starts with one person who may start to tease another person, may start to talk to that person in a negative way. And before you know it, other colleagues are treating that person the same way. And unfortunately, the targeted person really has no clue as to what's going on because his atmosphere has changed and he hasn't really clued into the fact that he may be experiencing bullying, which comes from incivility.
Exactly. I mean, I suspect that part of the problem is that it's so subtle. Incivility can be so subtle. A sarcastic, comment about the quality of a person's report, let's say, and so that is the problem is that people don't intervene because they don't recognize it.
Right. And that's one of the things with workplace bullying. It's very subtle.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I was just going to talk, when you were talking about incivility in the workplace, would something as commonplace as water cooler gossip about someone in the workplace, would that constitute bullying on a low level or incivility and something that should be dealt with earlier rather than later to get it out in the open sooner rather than later?
And I think that with gossiping, it is a form of bullying, and it's a threat to a person's professional status. So if you're around the water cooler, and we're talking about the football game the other night, well, that's not very harmful. However, if we're at the water cooler and we're talking about Joe down the street, or Joe in accounting, and he is the target of our conversations every time you and I meet at the water cooler, then that's a form of workplace bullying. Because what we're trying to do is devalue Joe. We are saying to each other that he is not worth being there and he doesn't deserve to be respected as you and I are. And it's a way of threatening his professional status. Excuse me, because if I can say things about Joe that make you think of Joe less, then that will have an impact in how we interact with him.
One of the things about incivility that happens both on the playground as well as in the boardroom, for lack of a better word, is that the form could be the unintentional incivility, and that unfortunately sometimes can be attributed to being a social klutz, or intentional incivility, which that is more serious, and that's where, Mike, you asked about what does one begin, where does the other one end. I find that the boundary is very porous, very, it's part of that jello-like characteristic, is that sometimes it's difficult to tell whether something is intentional incivility or bullying. And to some extent it really doesn't matter, And we don't want to get hung up on the definitional issue, but just to know that it's harmful. And as you said, Lisa, that sometimes, particularly in a workplace, people's livelihood becomes an issue, and that is a major problem.
And I'm also concerned not only about individuals' livelihood, but the emotional toll, the mental toll that it takes on individuals, the physical toll. Anyone who is being bullied, whether that individual is on the playground, in the schoolyard, or in the boardroom, eventually it will take its toll on that individual. And that's what I'm very much concerned about. We can say, oh, well, don't worry about that, or this person's being overly sensitive. But at the end of the day, if bullying behaviors continue, it will have a significant impact on individuals. And my research showed that 29% of people who are bullied experience anxiety, depression, and the statistic that is very concerning for me is the fact that 10% of these individuals consider suicide and homicide. So it's an issue that we definitely need to address, and we need to begin to take steps to address it in a positive way and to hold people accountable. We have to hold the children on the playground accountable. We have to hold bullies in the workplace accountable.
I mean, the issue of consequences is definitely an issue of critical importance. I would say that one of the major findings that has come out of the last 10, 20 years of research in bullying is that for the longest time we thought that the people who have really had a raw deal out of that exchange was the victim. But increasingly, and this goes back to that original issue, is that bullying is a short-term strategy. Increasingly, one of the things that we're finding that bullies don't fare well in the long run as well. So young children that are, let's say, elementary school children that are labeled as bullies, sometimes those are self-reports. They're not labeled by other people. One of the things that we find is that those are the children that graduate into having trouble with relationships, having trouble in the world of works, and down the road, they are overrepresented in our jails and in their interaction with the judicial system. So we could see that, I would say that as children go through, we should not just worry about the victim, but we should also worry about the bully, and this gets at that issue in the workplace. I think in the short term, people might do well, but in the long run, we have to think about the people that, as we said before, left behind. So.
You know, and it's interesting because there was a report that came out, and it was from the States, and it talked about how young kids, even in pre-K, were already being labeled as bullies or bad children, and so there's this concept called pre-K to jail, I believe that's the term, and those individuals who are identified as having bad behavior in pre-K, they're not even in kindergarten yet, pre-K.
Right.
The study had followed these individuals throughout their growth and stages of development, and those individuals were more likely than not to end up in prison. And that's sad that we're looking at little ones pre-K and predetermining that those individuals are more likely to be in prison or in jail. So that says to me that we need to begin to address this bullying behavior early on, because if the behavior doesn't change and if it's not corrected, then the likelihood that either the person's going to end up in jail or become someone's boss or someone's co-worker is significantly high.
Actually, you just remind me of something, Lisa. One of the alarming things that people have found is that very young kids who come to school, there is a subgroup of them that are unfortunately are higher risk of becoming involved in bullying behavior. And if you ask teachers that teach JK, they have a much better sense of what are some of the kids what are some of the characteristics of those children that are likely to get themselves into trouble? So things such as poor self-control, not being able to follow directions, and so on. But these, in fact, these teachers sometimes they're kind of the canary in the mine shaft. You know, they can tell that some of these children bring temperamental challenges to school, and if they're not properly recognized, the trajectory for these children, unfortunately, is quite, I would say, bleak. And without intervention, this just goes up and down the line.
And also, I think that if the children are, in a sense, rewarded for their behavior, or the behavior is ignored, then as they grow up and become adults, they may believe that their behavior is acceptable. And I think about the football players for the Miami Dolphins last year, where the one Dolphin player, Jonathan Martin, was bullied by his colleague to the point where he ended up quitting. And after the investigation, it was basically the culture of the organization. And I remember listening to some of the players, NFL players, talk about the issue, and they say, well, you know, this is just part of what we do in the locker room, you know, and this is how we treat our rookies. And that sent a message to me that says there are some organizations, there are some settings where bullying is acceptable. And so some individuals may grow up thinking that this behavior will get me to the next level. Maybe I'll be able to play in the NFL someday because I'm very aggressive and I know how to break people down. So it sends mixed messages to children, I believe.
You know, that's, again, Linda, you're triggering interesting thoughts, because that is one example that I used in my class as to break the stereotype. That bullying is just a child's, it's basically just for children. When you see these football players, they're about 6'6", 300 pounds, you're wondering what's going on. And yet, because of that culture, because of that kind of terrible relationship that gets people tolerated in that environment, even adults that you would, I mean, these are Ivy League educated people. They're not like people that they should know better. But when you put people in an environment that tolerates that, I mean, unfortunately, a highly competitive environment is just prime environment for bullying to thrive. And so that example is so great, because it just shows that bullying does take place at every level in our society.
Yes, it does. We look at our politicians. A lot of bullying going on with our politicians. And I'm sure we can all think of examples. So this behavior is acceptable. So how can we say to children, don't act this way, but when they look at the adults who are acting the same way and they're being rewarded, how can we convince the children not to adopt those behaviors?
I mean, it's funny, a famous psychologist, James, said that children, they never listen to their elders, but they never fail to imitate them. And so that kind of modeling is critical. We talk about the hardwire of our negative side of our humanity, but we're also hardwired for the I would say for the best part of our humanity, the best part of our nature. But children do have to have some sort of modeling. They have to be rewarded. Otherwise, bullying will thrive. I mean, that's part of the problem with bullying, is that it will thrive if people do not intervene, whether it's in a playground or whether it's in a factory or in a football field or something like that. So I would say that people should keep those two things in mind: the tension between the the aggressive side of humanity as well as the compassionate side. And so it seems that unfortunately that the aggressive side makes more of the news, because let's face it, if it moves, people. What do they say? If it bleeds, it leads. That's the kind of stuff that unfortunately we have to come to grips with that.
Right. Because the topic of bullying, whether it's with children or with adults, it can become very overwhelming for those of us who research it, for those of us who are helping individuals to try to work through their experiences. And it's overwhelming at times. And sometimes I question whether or not legislation would help. Similar to, and I've always said that perhaps we need legislation for bullying, similar to the legislation that we have for sexual harassment, discrimination. So I think that if we had some type of legislation at the federal level, I think it would hold, at least in the workplace, would hold employers accountable and would hold the employee who is bullying accountable. But at this point in time, the legislation that is there isn't very strong. It's not enforced. And so organizations know that there isn't any legislation there, so we really don't have to adhere to it. It would be nice if we had policies in place that said we won't allow bullying to occur. But at the end of the day, if a person's bullying behavior is positively affecting the bottom line, then do we really want to change? Do we really want to have that individual change his or her behavior? So there's so many different issues that we need to address with bullying.
Well, it's interesting, because at the elementary school level and as well as the high school level, at the school level, there are quite a few initiatives, and Canada actually is leading the way in terms of putting legislation in place. So Ontario has a Safe School Act. The recent Amanda Todd that you mentioned has spurred at the federal level even some intervention on cyberbullying.
Yes.
I would say those are good starts, but again, it addresses more the negative side of bullying as opposed to how do we encourage people to be more proactive, pro-social, so that they don't behave antisocial. And so legislation, I think, is slowly catching up, but like anything else, legislation is only as good as people are willing to engage it. And I know that some of the Norwegian countries have actually had a more national approach, and they had a little more success. And so I think Canada is slowly ramping up, particularly with the cyberbullying in, I would say, in the elementary school kids and the high school. So, but there's still, it's a way to go, and there's always a discussion as to how much do you put emphasis on the punishment side and how much do you put emphasis on the educational side.
We're going to look at cyberbullying now, which really was the crux of the matter in the Amanda Todd case. Is the internet in general, and social media in particular, providing a vast new frontier for bullies? And if so, how can we control that? Or should we be able to control that?
I would say, I could start if you don't mind. I would say that the cyber world, the electronic world, provides another forum for the same psychological mechanisms to basically get activated. So when we're talking about disrespect, when we're talking about demeaning people, all of a sudden people have a new way of doing all those. The major issue between cyber bullying versus more traditional face-to-face bullying is the escalation factor. Once people put a comment on Facebook, let's say, or on any of those social media outlets, it's instantaneous and it multiplies by thousands. So it's not like you call someone a name and that's the end of that story. It's just between two people, maybe 2 or 3 people watching. That's part of the issue with cyberbullying, is that we still have to address the usual psychological mechanism, the issue of disrespect, the issue of, let's say, treating people with some sort of, caring, and as opposed to, let's say, when people get into, one of the things that we find, for example, in the cyber world, is just way more difficult to patrol, to identify, and so that becomes a way bigger issue. And to basically to get on top of it, requires a terrific amount of resources.
Yes. Excuse me. And also with cyberbullying, it's significantly different than traditional bullying in that Zopito can bully me at work for 8 hours. I know I'm going home and I won't have to see him until tomorrow. However, with cyberbullying, as soon as I go online, Zopito may be posting negative messages about me. And what has happened now is the world can see these messages. And Zopito may post these messages and remain anonymous. So now I don't know if Zopito's doing it. I suspect that he's doing it, but I really can't put my finger on it and say, yes, he is indeed the one posting these messages. So with cyberbullying, it's 24 hours, 7 days a week. The person cannot get away from it. And we hear a lot about cyberbullying for young folks, but it's happening with adults too. And I refer back to the NFL case with Richie Incognito and Jonathan Martin. Tweets were sent from Richie Incognito about Jonathan Martin. Those are in cyber world forever. So it has a long-lasting impact on the targeted person. So it's a whole new world that we have to look at when we look at cyberbullying. Now, the saving grace perhaps for bullies, people who are being bullied in the workplace, is the fact that if they can link it to the workplace, perhaps the employer can step in and address the issue.
I mean, that's part of the issue, is that you have to have some, active organization that takes this seriously. And for the longest time, cyberbullying wasn't taken seriously until, unfortunately, we have seen some of the terrible, cases, and those now get magnified. And so the cyber world now is becoming a new, as it were, new playground that we're still trying to understand what the lay of the land is. But nevertheless, we still have to deal with people as people, and that's the way to. I would say the way to try to manage cyberbullying is still at the human level, still at the at the more of a person to person, so that you're trying to prevent people from getting access to a computer and doing all those things.
And what scares me about cyberbullying is that there are so many individuals who may not even know the targeted person. They start chiming in, and that only magnifies the effect for that individual, because you may have 1,000 people, maybe 10,000 people commenting on what a horrible person you are. And whereas in the workplace, if you know that you're working on a team of 5, there are 5 people there. So it's a little more controllable. I think that with cyberbullying, it's just out of control.
It does have it does have that kind of potential for amplification, which is and quickly can escalate it totally out of hand. And one of the points that you made earlier, Lisa, was that it's like once it's out there, it's very difficult to basically get rid of it. I mean, you post a questionable picture on the net, even if the server goes in and takes the picture off, but once it goes into cyberspace, it's going to be, I would say, impossible.
And this is where, when we talk about incivility, and we had a discussion a little bit earlier about the society, what responsibility do we have as a society to address these issues, to address bullying? Each and every individual, I believe, has to be responsible for his or her actions and be held accountable for them if they are treating others in a negative way. But I'm wondering, with the introduction of the internet, if we have lost control of civility.
Well, we definitely, now unfortunately, we have another tool that we can use to become uncivil. But definitely, part of the problem is that anonymity. If you don't like somebody, you can, a very skilled, technologically skilled person can create a havoc into people's lives in a way that you cannot imagine. And so that is part of that point that we start off with, is that some of the same psychological principles at work, but now they can, they can amplify their, I would say, their mischief.
Yes.
And that's put it lightly.
Well, I think we could do an entire program on cyberbullying at some point, but we're going to wrap up our discussion right now with a go around the table with both of you listing your most, well, the best tips, I suppose, the best way to put it, the best tips to deal with bullying in school, among children, incivility, bullying in the workplace, amongst adults. So let's begin with you, Zopito, on that.
I would say that we start out by talking about whether we are hardwired to be aggressive or whether we're hardwired to be compassionate. And it goes back to the cost-benefit ratio. As long as people can carry out bullying and they benefit from doing so, then it becomes an issue to motivate them to change. So one of the first things that we could do, we have to change that. And the way we do it through sanction, we do it through social sanction, but we should try to do is redirect that energy into other ways, so that if someone wants to be a leader, one way to be a leader is to be a leader of a gang. But the gang can do something positive, i.e. organizing a basketball game at recess for children versus going and beat up children at recess. And so those two things has to go hand in hand. I would say the other thing that, and this applies more to civility than anything else, is that we should really try to model the kind of behavior we want our children to, basically to, the way we want our children to behave. I mean, Fred Astaire, of all people, said that how can kids learn manners if they don't see any? That modeling issue is really big. The other thing is that we should reward good behavior. And again, this is more the educational bias that we both have, is that if people are busy doing good deeds, they're less busy doing bad deeds, as it were. And so one of the things that we should try to do is definitely trying to change that cost-benefit ratio, model good behavior, and reward good behavior when we see it.
Okay, and Dr. Lisa?
And I agree with Zopito as well. And I'd like to, first of all, say, for the individuals who are being targeted, there are a couple of things that you can do. First of all, document. Talk to Human Resources if you are a member of the union. You talk to your union rep, your manager, anyone who's in authority. Let them know that this behavior is occurring. The next item is to take care of yourself. Because when a person is being bullied for a long period of time. They experience, as I said earlier, anxiety, depression, and they may have homicidal or suicidal thoughts. So it's important for the individuals to get the support that they need, professional support, talk to a counselor, talk to your spiritual leader, talk to your friends, your family member, let people know what is happening, because I think that individuals who are targeted often feel very isolated, and this is where they are pushed to possibly choose an alternative, which is committing suicide or perhaps homicide. And it's also important to educate yourself about bullying, the impact, and whatever. For the organization, I would say try to create a bully-free organization, workplace. Hold people accountable. When someone talks about being bullied, take them seriously, investigate. Those are just a few steps that individuals can take in order to address workplace bullying. Because at the end of the day, you're right, we need to reward people who are acting in a civil manner and not reward those who are acting in an uncivil way.
And that includes this edition of the program. Our guests from Brock University have been Zopito Marini from the Department of Child and Youth Studies at Brock and Dr. Lisa Barrow from the Goodman School of Business at Brock. Thanks to you both for being a part of the discussion today.
Thank you for having us.